Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jubilee Circle in Conversation. We are so glad that you have joined us here in the building and here live recorded. We are recording this for later on YouTube, and I wanted to just welcome you to Jubilee Circle. My name is Candace Shalou. I am the founder and spiritual director here at Jubilee Circle. We are at 6729 Two Notch Road, and we do the Sunday morning things at 11:15. So please join us here on this YouTube channel or here in the building. We are a metaphysical, weird spiritual community, and we exist for the arts and for music and for Holy Spirit and for all things mysterious, and that is Jubilee Circle. We struggle to describe how we are at Jubilee Circle, so we just say, "Come on down and see us," and you'll see for yourself. But tonight we have with us Mr. Al Black, and if you are anywhere in the music scene in Columbia, you can't miss Al Black. He knows everyone who is everyone in the music scene, and he has helped us with our open mic nights and some of the performances here that we have had at Jubilee Circle of some of the amazing local musicians that are here in Columbia, South Carolina. But that's not why he's here tonight. He's here to talk about another aspect of his life. He is an amazing poet and an amazing writer in his own right, but he is also a member of the Baha'i Faith. And one of the things that we are doing in our Jubilee Circle in Conversation broadcasts is to explore other faiths. We are here at Jubilee Circle, we are nominally Christian and also metaphysical and others, and so we're also interested in being interfaith and knowing a lot about other faith traditions and how others connect with the holy in this world. And so Al is here to talk to us about the Baha'i Faith, and he has just returned from Haifa, where in Israel, where the International Baha'i, is it a headquarters?
The World Center is there, as well as the shrines of the Bab and Baha'u'llah.
Yes, and we will get into all of that, so we know exactly what those terms mean and what we're talking about. But I do know you, Al, and I've known you for a while, and we've had religious and spiritual conversations before, and you didn't start out in the Baha'i Faith. I know you started, actually, you were in the United Church of Christ is where you were raised.
Yes, I was actually going to be a minister. However, the Baha'is no longer have, there's no clergy in the Baha'i Faith, so I lost my career, and at 70, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be.
Well, you're probably not alone.
Yeah.
Everybody's still trying to figure it out. Well, tell us a little bit about your background, about being in the UCC, and how your faith has evolved into a Baha'i faith.
Okay. I grew up in the United Church of Christ, which, those that don't know, of the mainline Christian organizations in the United States, it's one of the more liberal.
Yeah.
It didn't start out as liberal, but as the centuries went on, they became much more liberal. And I had always admired the activist ministers, whether it was the Berrigan brothers, whether it was, the guy in Germany, you know him.
Bonhoeffer.
Whether it was Bonhoeffer, whether it was Martin Luther King, you know.
Barth. You were talking about Barth?
You can.
In German?
Yes.
In Germany?
But many of the people who were big change agents, not just in the United States but worldwide, came out of being ministers. Mm-hmm. And so as I looked at what I wanted to do in my life, I wanted to be in their footsteps. Mm-hmm. And just before I went away to college, I met a young girl in a church parking lot, by the way. And we were talking about religion. And I was saying, well, you know, I don't know why we can't work with the Buddhists and why we can't work with these people and that people. She said, that sounds like something my brother was talking about. He gave me a book. I haven't looked at it. And she gave me a book called Baha'u'llah in the New Era. And I took the book, and to be honest, I read the book to impress a girl. Okay? And back in the early 70s and late 60s, there used to be what was called free universities.
Yes.
And what it is many public schools and colleges, if they weren't using their space, they allowed someone to say, if you wanted to teach a bread baking class, or candle making, or Baha'i fireside, or this or that, you could say what your class is going to be, what time you'd like to have it, and they would give you space. And they were called free universities. You can look them up. It was a big movement in the 60s and 70s. And so I was going to Ball State as a voice major and religion minor. Because United Church of Christ wanted you to go to public school first before you went to the seminary. And I was looking at the free university, and they go, Baha'i fireside, and I went. So I went to a Baha'i fireside class, and I'm talking to them, and I just read the book, so I knew everything. I knew everything. And they said, oh, there's about 50 Baha'is in Tippecanoe County. That's my home county. It was like, oh, no, there's not. That's my county. I know everything.
I know everybody.
I'm 18. I know everything. And so, what do you mean? There's these people, Baha'is, in my county, and why haven't I? If I haven't heard of them, of course they don't exist.
Right.
But they gave me a name and a number. So, in December, when I went back home, and I'd made a date with that young lady, I gave her the name. Uh-huh. And she started going to firesides in Lafayette. Her mother didn't like me. I didn't belong to a country club. I wasn't this, I wasn't that. And so she'd only let her see me once a week. So we also went to fireside once a week. Huh. So I got to see her twice. And 14 months later, after going to my first fireside, I became a Baha'i, and I got married.
Hey,
to that same girl. Yeah. So that's how I became a Baha'i. And looking at any faith, if you're just looking for a faith that agrees with everything you want to do, then just start your own religion.
Right.
Okay. There were things, I was very involved in anti-war, civil rights, and quite radical politics, actually, on that side of it. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I liked to imbibe in substances, and if I liked it, I wanted to do it twice. So becoming a Baha'i, that was one of the big struggles, was my politics and the fact that I like to imbibe. Mm-hmm. But it came to the point where, for me, if you believe someone is who they say they are, and if their scripture says this shouldn't be done, then is that person right? Or are you right?
Yeah.
And fortunately, I come to the point where I had realized I didn't know everything. I still struggle with that.
I had to say, does Carol know this?
She reminds me often.
Okay.
She reminds me often that I don't know everything.
Okay.
Yes.
Keep you humble.
And if she doesn't, our children will.
Well, there you go.
That's part of what it is. Now my sons, when we're discussing something, if it gets to the point where either they don't agree or it's not going their way, it's now, okay, boomer.
Okay, boomer. Yes.
Right. I don't know what it was when you were a kid, like,
yeah.
What phrase you'd use with your parents to kind of turn them off.
Yes.
Now it's okay, boomer.
Yes.
Is what they're using.
Right, because because the boomers don't know anything now. Yeah.
Oh, yes. All right. So that's how I became a Baha'i.
Oh, nice. Well, tell us a little bit about what Baha'is believe. What are you?
Okay.
Apparently not imbibing. That's in there.
The Baha'i Faith is the newest of the world's major religions. And I say that because we are the second most widespread religion in the world. And you've probably known Baha'is in your life and didn't know it because we don't proselytize. Baha'u'llah says that your deeds must outweigh your words. And in my case, I like to talk a lot. So that means I have to do a lot.
Right.
And that's why people see me around a lot. But in 1844, in which if you look at Messianic movements of the past, there were many in 1844. The Millerites, the Seventh-day Adventists, a number of, even Joseph Smith and the Mormons. Originally was Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he said in 1844 this is going to happen.
Yeah.
But in 1844, in Iran, a descendant of Muhammad, who was a merchant, a young man, 25, declared himself to be the promised one who would usher in the one, as he called it, the one whom God would make manifest. And in Shia Islam, they talked about the Mahdi, and he filled that role. After he declared himself in 1844, many people flocked to his message. Many of the mullahs and clergy flocked to his message, which threw the whole country into uproar, and many Babis. The Bab means the gate. And many Babis were killed, and for a while they actually fought back, and were killed in pitched battles as well. But one of his followers, who found his message and became a Babi, was a rich noble, and he had become known in his community as the father of the poor. He had been offered at his father's passing a job for the Shah as one of the ministers of the Shah, but he had turned it down, was not interested. In 1850, the Bab was killed. He was arrested. He himself would not fight, and he was imprisoned here and there, and eventually he was killed. And there's even a story which made it in the French papers about his killing, his martyrdom. He was suspended from a wall in an Iranian city called Tabriz, and they lined up. Originally, it was a regiment of Armenian Christians, a regiment of 750 rifles, and at the time they were taking him from his cell. He was in a conversation with one of the other believers that was in the cell. And he told the jailer, not till I'm done with this conversation will I be, killed. And they took him out, suspended him from a nail, suspended him and one of his other followers from a nail together. They fired the volley to kill him. And when the smoke cleared, because that was before smokeless
Yes.
black powder, when the smoke cleared, he wasn't there, and the person he was suspended with was there by the wall. So they went around trying to find him, and they found him back in his jail cell, finishing his conversation.
Wow.
And this is reported in French newspapers where,
Wow.
People actually, Westerners witnessed this because it was, for what, it was, there were a lot of Westerners in Iran because it was very, what was happening among the Babis and everything else was making the news. But he was then, after he finished his conversation, they took him out, he was suspended again. The Armenian regiment refused to fire again. In fact, I forgot, as part of the story, and the Armenian regiment colonel had said that this was a conversation, that he didn't see anything wrong with the Bab, and he had asked the Bab, or told the Bab he didn't want to do it, and asked him to take this from him. And the Bab said, if this isn't what you want to do, then, and you believe this, then do what you're supposed to do. And so when the Bab survived, he said no. So then another regiment volunteered, and he was killed. Then also, the Babis were still up in arms. Someone attempted to kill the Shah, and this rich noble, who was Hussein Ali was his name at the time, and he, after the assassination, he heard that they were going to arrest him because he was probably the most prominent politically of all the Babis. And so he was arrested and put into a cell. It's called the Sia Shal. It used to be an underground reservoir called the Black Pit. What was it? And there he was chained, and he claims, and I believe his claim, that a holy maiden came and revealed to him that he was the promised one, the one whom God would make manifest. And after, I can't remember the exact length of time, but he spent quite some time in the Black Pit, and actually carried injuries from the chains on his shoulders his whole life. He was then released, and in the meantime, they had pillaged all of his wealth, his land, everything, and he was sent into exile into Baghdad by the Persian government, and Baghdad was in the Ottoman Empire. But often, neighboring empires, you take my exile, I'll take your exile.
Right.
You take my problems, I'll take yours.
Yeah.
So he was he then was exiled for a number of years into Baghdad. But many folks, but he didn't publicly declare himself. And he was a leader among the Babis. He became a center for the Babis. Also during that time when he was exiled, copies of the Bab's book, which was called the Bayan, had been read and studied. And in it, the Bab had not issued a law for religious fighting, which you find in the Quran. And so Baha'u'llah, who Hussein Ali became known as Baha'u'llah, the glory of God, said, since it is not in the Bayan to fight, we do not fight back anymore. And the Babis mostly followed what he had to say. Eventually, because he became kind of the focus of many people's energy and desires, many Babis were coming to Baghdad. The Ottoman Empire decided to exile him further from Iran so that he was not a problem.
Okay.
The governor of Baghdad had begun to know Baha'u'llah and become a friend. And it took several months before he finally agreed, he was forced to give the order that he had to be exiled. And so when that order was given, then Baha'u'llah, a well-known person, a wealthy man in Baghdad, had an island in the middle of the river.
Hmm.
And he went there. And when he went there, he went with just a few of his followers. And that was in 1863, in April. April 21st. And to those few, he declared, I am the promised one. I'm the promised one of all religions. And then the river flooded, and so they were there. And 9 days later, his family was able to come over. 12 days later, the flood totally receded, and he was able to meet the public. And then he was, and a number of his followers and his family were exiled under army. They were basically they were under the arrest, of course, of the Ottoman Empire, and the army took him away, and eventually across land he ended up in Constantinople, and the Baha'is, now it's Baha'is, followers of Baha'u'llah, kept coming to Constantinople. So they shipped him to Adrianople, which is in Europe. It's now in Deerney is the name of it. And that didn't work either. So then they sent him on a ship, which eventually ended up in the offshore of Haifa, which if you look at pictures of Haifa at that time, Haifa was just a little village. It's now the #1 port in Israel.
Yeah.
But it was just a little village. And from Haifa, they put him on a smaller boat, and then he was shipped to the prison city of Akka, across the bay from Haifa. Akka is famous for thousands and thousands of years. You know, at one time it was a Crusader city. The Templars were there. Another time it was a Muslim city. Another time it was attacked by Napoleon. Napoleon attacked. But it was a prison city, and he was imprisoned in the outer walls in what had been army barracks. But he was imprisoned in a cell, him and 70 of his followers, family and followers. And he spent 2 years and 4 months in those cells before he was finally released. He was still a prisoner, and that was a prison city. And they were allowed to find accommodations, and they rented a home in the city, a house in the city that he lived in. And from the time that he was originally in exile in Baghdad until his passing in 1892, he was a prisoner. Eventually, he was allowed by the governor to live outside the city walls. He lived in 2 different homes there. They rented a home, which that he lived in for a while, out in the country a little bit, after being inside the prison city for over 7 years and not seeing greenery or anything.
Yeah.
And then there was a pandemic.
Huh. Interesting.
Yes, a pandemic in the area, and a man who they had rented a house from before in Akka had built a big home out in the country.
Yeah.
But he wasn't going to stay around after building this house because of the pandemic. And they were able to rent it at a very inexpensive price, or acquire it at a very inexpensive price. And so he lived the last few years of his life in this place. When he passed, his son, Abdul Baha, was appointed the center of the faith in his will and testament. But also, he got permission, since he was a prisoner of the Sultan, he got permission from the Sultan to bury his father in a building next to this house that Baha'u'llah had been living in. And that's where Baha'is turn to in prayer. That is where I went on pilgrimage to his burial site. There, he was buried there. And the Bab is buried in Haifa. And if you ever look at pictures of Haifa, Baha'u'llah actually was given freedom to go to Haifa 4 times. And he pitched his tent at the bottom of the mountain, on the top of the mountain. But he stood there and pointed to a spot on the mountain to Abdul-Baha and said, there, I want the Bab buried. And there's where, which is where, if you look at pictures of Haifa, and the shrine of the Bab is. So for Baha'is, when we go on pilgrimage, we actually visit places that Baha'u'llah walked, that Abdul-Baha walked, where they lived, where they're buried. Baha'u'llah, all religions, Christianity talks about a time of the end, a time of the return. Yep. Buddhists, they talk about a 5th Buddha. You find about, the Hindus talk about a time of the end. All the great faiths of the world talk about, the Zoroastrians talked about Shah Bahram. They all talk about a time of the end. I became a Baha'i because after reading his proofs and looking at the scriptures I grew up with, I believe Baha'u'llah to fulfill those prophecies. To become a Baha'i means that you accept Baha'u'llah for who he says he is, and that he is the promised one of all ages. This is the age of unity. This is the age when all religions will cooperate and come together. There's one God, and all religions essentially agree. I'm not saying that the leaders agree.
Right.
But if you look at what Muhammad's writings talk about, if you look at what the writings of Judaism, if you look at the writings of Christianity, of Buddhism, of Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, all the great religions, they essentially say the same thing.
Absolutely.
Within that,
Yeah.
Baha'is talk about progressive revelation. Okay? And what that is, in very simplistic terms, is in the Adamic cycle. I'll take the Adamics. Abraham taught of a family and gave laws of how to live within a family. Moses taught of how to live within a tribe. Jesus taught of how to live in a time of city-states and living under an empire. Muhammad talked of nationhood and gave laws of how to create a nation and live of nationhood. Baha'u'llah's laws are about how do we live as a world. So some of the basic teachings of Baha'u'llah, and you have to remember this is the 19th century in probably one of the most backwards Islamic countries of the world at that time. He said, men and women are equal. Boy, you want to talk about making a whole society mad. Woo!
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, well, something. He also said that now it is possible for every human being to be taught how to read and write. And the purpose of the clergy no longer exists. Which really threw the religious authorities of Islam.
They're out of a job, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and out of money, yeah. But, it's very understandable. In the time of Muhammad or Jesus or Moses, there were no printing presses. To have written word was very rare.
Yeah.
And so very few people could read. And so a clergy was very necessary. It was
Yeah.
a gift to humanity. But so periodically, humanity is gifted a manifestation. Baha'u'llah says in 1,000 years, but not before the expiration of 1,000 years. It'll be time for humanity to take the next step. And there'll be another manifestation of God. For Baha'is, if you want to, you can't choose, I want to be, I don't believe that you can choose to be a manifestation of God. We believe that periodically in history, God chooses and prepares a human being to be a manifestation of God. If you want to look at a mirror, if you hold a mirror up to the sun, obviously the sun cannot come down to earth because it would burn the earth before it got here. But you can look in that mirror and say, there is the sun. Well, periodically we believe that God, and I'll explain that in a minute, perfectly polishes a mirror to reflect the emendations of God. So when some people talk of a Trinity, which by the way is never mentioned in Scripture, it's something that was extrapolated by the clergy. But you have God or the Son. You have the Holy Spirit coming down, invisible, and imbuing itself on a perfectly polished mirror. In the case of Christianity, that was Jesus. So when you look at Jesus and you want to say, there is God, I can accept that. But we know that really the Son cannot come down and reside in a mirror. But if I were to hold a mirror up and say, there's the sun, you'd say, yeah, there's the sun. Okay. So to carry that analogy forward, periodically, we are given a new manifestation. Every manifestation knows all that the other one will. But in their wisdom, they only teach us what we need for that time in that place. As Jesus said, there is more I could tell you, but you cannot bear it.
Right.
If he were to talk about space travel and radios and ships flying in
Cell
the air,
phones, yeah. Facebook.
they would have said, he's gone mad.
Right.
Oh, Jesus has gone mad. But in his wisdom, he only shares what folks know at that time and what they need to progress. Baha'is believe, and Baha'u'llah said it to us, the Creator or God's purpose is for man to carry on an ever-advancing civilization. Mm-hmm. Right now, it doesn't look too civilized,
right.
But Baha'u'llah's, he's given us teachings for today. And humanity will either gradually turn towards them or have no choice but to turn to them for survival.
Yeah.
It is not important for a Baha'i to make other people Baha'i. It is important that we become protagonists together for improving the world. So it is important for Baha'is to be involved with others in the community, and where we have unity of belief, we will cooperate together on things. Some of the other teachings of Baha'u'llah, and he has a whole book of laws called the Kitab-i-Aqdas, which is much more detailed. But basically, one God, religion should agree, men and women are equal. Science and religion should agree. Mm-hmm. Where religion says something that disagrees with science, it's superstition. And science without religion is a monster.
Yeah, can be. Yeah,
Yeah, well,
just
let's
ask
talk,
the Nazis.
Yeah, but ask Oppenheimer.
Yes,
Yeah,
there
he
you
was a
go.
pure scientist.
Yeah.
You know, you know, so science and religion must agree. We believe that there should be a compulsory universal education. You know, because how can...
For girls and boys.
Well, this is something to get more detail.
Everybody, yeah.
In Baha'u'llah's Book of Laws, he states that if a man has a daughter and a son, and only the money to educate one, he must educate the daughter first.
Wow. All right.
Because the daughter, the women are usually the first educator. And so it is most important for the women to have an education, more important for a woman to have an education than for the man. And that is, you know, oh my gosh, in a Muslim country, you're saying you educate not only women,
Yeah.
you educate them over
first.
the men.
Right. Wow.
If you don't have enough money. So,
That's just enough to get him killed right there.
yeah. So some of the other teachings are that there should be a world auxiliary language. One of the problems in the world is we can't communicate with each other.
Is this where Esperanto came from?
Actually, technically no, but the daughter of the founder of Esperanto became a Baha'i,
Well.
but was killed in the concentration camp because her father, you know, she comes from a Jewish family.
Yes. Yeah.
And they killed all the Jews. By the way, they killed the Baha'is too.
I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah, the Baha'is
and
was
all the,
illegal.
and all the gays.
And, yeah.
And all the gays.
Yeah,
so, yes.
you know, we just weren't.
And the
Yes, and Esperantists,
Yes.
you know, but, you know, there weren't 6 million Baha'is.
Yes.
But there was a large German community that was killed, as well as much of the French community. But, you know, Baha'u'llah has a number of teachings. We believe there should be a world tribunal or government, you know, but Baha'is don't believe in a theocracy. We don't believe we're ever going that a theocracy is, you know, there isn't going to be a Baha'i theocracy. People may come to the Baha'i for advice, maybe, but there will always be other faiths. There will always be disparate views. And one of the uppermost teachings of the faith of Baha'u'llah is the independent investigation of the truth. And that when you find what you believe to be the truth, you follow it. Well, that necessarily means that not everyone's going to believe the same thing. So, you know, I'm open to discussing more in detail about some of these different aspects of the Baha'i faith. But what is important for Baha'is is to teach issues of unity, of the equality of men and women. Baha'u'llah actually says, talking about science and religion must agree, it is a teaching of Baha'u'llah that if you are ill, you go to a competent physician.
Yeah.
You know, we don't eschew medicine.
Yeah.
You know, that is a law. So that's a basic synopsis of Baha'i. You know, I think I could bore you all with all kinds of minutia, but I will answer any questions because maybe the minutia I want to share isn't a direct question that you may have. I would encourage you to go to Baha'i.org, BAHAI.org, and it's a good starting point. I'm always willing to sit down over caffeine with people. Anyone that knows me?
That's not forbidden, right?
No, no, we're allowed caffeine. Thank God. Oh, by the way, I had said I'd explain our concept of God.
Yes. What is the Baha'i concept of God?
It's neither male or female. Okay. But Baha'u'llah says it is the unknowable essence. And that we cannot give an adequate definition of God because we're not there. You know, so it is the unknowable essence. And that unknowable essence wants to love us and to upraise us and wants to be loved in return. Love me that I may love thee, for if thou lovest me not, how can my love reach you?
And
It's a reciprocal.
well, so then do Baha'is have a practice of prayer?
Yes. In the laws of Baha'u'llah, Baha'is are to pray every day. And there are 3 options. One is the short prayer, a short obligatory prayer, which should be said at dawn, and dawn is from sun up to noon. There's a middle prayer, a medium prayer, and then there is the long obligatory prayer, which has genuflections and everything else. It is up to you to choose which one you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
When you say it, you face Baha'u'llah's gravesite. You know, you turn and face his gravesite. In fact, he said, in turning there, you are turning to me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Baha'is do not believe that atoms have any atom has any special. His atoms or the Bob's atoms are just atoms returning to dust.
Mm.
However, the special relationship between a soul and that body is what makes that space or that place special. Not the atoms that are in that gravesite,
Mm-hmm.
but the relationship between the soul and the spirit. Necessarily, because this is a world of metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot talk about, or you cannot talk about spiritual things without a metaphor to something physical.
Right.
Okay? Such as many people talk about light.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and light has, and the light of the spirit.
Yeah.
Again, it's a physical metaphor that we can begin, possibly if our heart is open, to understand a little bit of what is trying to be said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so we do have the practice of prayer. We're also encouraged to read the writings every day. We are encouraged to take yourself into account every day. In other words, how can you improve
Mm-hmm.
unless you review your life, see what it is you've done well, not done, what you could do better, kinder, whatever, and change it.
Yeah.
So we're told to bring ourselves to account each day.
Mm-hmm.
And we believe in the power of prayer. We also believe in the power of science and action.
Right.
And if you're just going to sit somewhere and pray for a miracle, when you could be doing some work
Yeah.
or something to help that happen.
So it's because it's deeds over your words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, that doesn't mean miraculous things don't happen.
Sure.
But this is a life. This is the physical phenomenal creation in which we have a body.
Mm-hmm.
And we should use it and use it wisely. And we were given a brain to use wisely. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm a politician and dancing.
No, it's okay. Is there a concept of an afterlife, a heaven or a hell?
Yes. What exactly that is,
Mm-hmm.
you can't really know unless you've been there. But we are assured that there is a life, that God is all merciful and all understanding. However, we can look at it much. Here's a metaphor on the physical again.
Okay.
When you're in the womb, if you don't develop properly, you may end up coming out without the correct arms and legs to operate the best.
Mm-hmm.
In this life, if you don't develop yourself spiritually, if you don't pay attention to those issues and try to do things, you will not go into the next world with some of the things you need to best go there. But God is all merciful, okay? And everybody also has different capabilities. Some people are smarter, some people are kinder, some people are taller, whatever. Those things that have to do with our personality and the limitations of our bodies are not something that you carry into the next world. You carry your actions. So like, you know, I look at Christ, and he has this story of the woman at the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about the rich man who gives money very ostentatiously to make everybody know how much he gave.
Right.
And then this woman, this poor woman, who gives her only coin, he says that is greater. So, for me, as someone who grew up with those stories and parables, and as a Baha'i, I look at that as an example of many things, but one of them is in the next life. Just because someone is smarter or more adept at thinking or has a better body or whatever it is, it's all about what you do with what you have.
Right.
You know? It's a matter of action. If I do 1,000 good things by accident,
Yeah.
it does. And which people do good things by accident.
Yeah.
It is not as worthy to, okay, as a person who tries to do good things and fails at it.
Yeah.
Because it's really about your action. It's about what you try to do. Now, I want people to understand. What I am saying here is is one Baha'i who has read some of the scriptures, because Baha'u'llah wrote over 100 books and tablets.
Wow.
That, you know, I don't think I could read it all in my lifetime. But it is only as Al Black has read the Baha'i writings and has taken them into his life, and I'm giving them back to you as I see them. I encourage you to look at it yourself and, you know, to read it in the words of Baha'u'llah. Many of his books and tablets are presently translated. Not all of them are, because it is important to translate them well and beautifully.
Yeah.
Not just some, I don't know how many of you read translations of poetry, but I'll take poetry as an example. People have seen translations of Rumi's poetry
Yes.
for hundreds of years.
Yes.
And he was known, but, you know, oh yeah, he was an old poet from whatever. But when the poet Coleman Barks
Yes. Yes.
started translating Rumi into English, Then they were translated beautifully
Yes, absolutely.
and poetically.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, this poet that's maybe some academics had heard of him, now everybody's heard of him.
That's right. Everybody
He's
loves
ve-
Rumi.
And the renditions
Mm-hmm.
by Coleman Barks are beautiful.
Yes.
It is important for the Baha'is
Mm-hmm.
that when we make translations of the writings of Baha'u'llah, that one, they are accurate. And so you really have to study the context and the history in which they were written. But also that they are beautifully translated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so many of them are translated. They're still working on translating other ones, such as, you know, there are scriptures by Baha'u'llah talking about in 1,000 years, you know. Well, we got a few years till we really need to worry about what we're looking for.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I'm sure those will be later ones that are translated.
Right.
But you know, I can provide you a stack probably this thick of stuff that's translated.
Well, let's see if there's anyone who has any questions that are sitting out here. Does anyone have any questions for Al? Any? I'll translate the question as you say it. If you have something to, maybe not as beautifully as you say it.
About the prayers, you said that three possible ways, shorter, a little longer, a lot longer. What's kind of the gist of the prayers? Is it, give me the strength to do the right thing, or is it
Okay,
I'll do
let me
the short-
translate it.
I would, okay.
So she's asking about what are the prayers? What's sort of the gist of the prayers? And so there's a short, medium, and long. But what are you saying in those prayers?
The short prayer, which I have memorized, and I have a horrible time doing memorization. And I think part of it is that growing up I hated catechism,
Gotcha.
and I resisted memorization in catechism class.
Right.
But I'm just not great. But the short obligatory prayer is, I bear witness, O my God, that thou hast created me to know thee and to worship thee. And I testify at this moment to my powerlessness and to thy might, and to my poverty and to thy wealth. Now I'm trying to do this publicly, and Baha'is
Of
don't
course.
do public prayers.
Right.
I dedicate myself to thee. Now, correct me if someone did I say it right? You know, I never do it in front of people. All of a sudden, it was just
Right.
like
Yeah.
There is none other God but the help and
peril, the self-subsisting. Okay, and I could by myself say it, but all of a sudden I'm like,
Of course.
Baha'is don't do public prayer.
Yeah.
There is only one congregational prayer, and that is the prayer for the dead to be read at the funeral site at burial. Other than that, we may read at a function a prayer written by Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha or the Bab, but we don't do a recitation back and forth, a give and go, you know. So, and Baha'is are also told you don't go muttering the sacred scriptures on street corners. You know, so if
Or somebody told the Christians that one.
So if you ever wanted to be John the Baptist or stand up in the middle of campus and start preaching, you can't do that as a Baha'i.
There's no Baha'i on a soapbox somewhere.
There shouldn't be.
There shouldn't be.
You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to be, you know, again, sometimes Baha'is are not, each Baha'i reads the writings for themselves and tries to live them.
Yeah.
And we're each going to live them a little differently.
What does that look like, living out that belief?
Well, I think in any religion or any philosophy, it means if you accept something to be the truth, and for Baha'is, we believe in the independent investigation of the truth. If you come to the realization that this is the truth, then you should live it, okay? Whatever that is. And in fact, we have been told by Abdul Baha. He said, there are many people who will call themselves Baha'i and aren't.
Same for Christians.
And there are many people who have never heard the word and are. So
Same for Christians.
It's but if God's desire is for you to independently investigate the truth,
Yeah.
and in sincerely investigating the truth, you find this to be the truth. I'm not talking about Baha'i, I'm talking about anything.
Yeah.
And then you try to the utmost of your ability, because, you know, I don't know about you, but my life isn't here to there. It's
Yeah. Right.
you know. But to the best of your ability, you try to live
Yeah.
that truth.
Yeah.
That's all God asks. And he's not judging, he's judging your effort. And he, again, Baha'is
Yeah,
don't believe
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we're not being judged by the end result, but on the action itself.
Gotcha.
But in the teachings of Baha'u'llah, where you should bring yourself to account each day, hopefully, as you bring yourself to account, you recognize sometimes, oh, I need to make an adjustment.
Yes. Yes.
It isn't that the rest of the world is wrong. Maybe
Yes.
I need to make an adjustment.
Yes.
And this is how you go through, improving.
And I guess that we're assuming that as you're investigating the truth, that truth is something that leads you in a direction toward being of service in some way or being helpful in the
Yes.
world in some way, and not truth, I have the truth and everyone must believe this truth, and then it becomes a destructive form of
If
searching
you
for the
believe in
truth.
the independent investigation of the truth, then it didn't say in your independent investigation of the truth. It says the independent. So I believe and uphold your right to arrive at a different decision than I have. And to believe in the independent investigation of the truth means you're allowing and honoring your search as well.
Okay. All right. So I'm just trying to get. I'm trying to get it here. So if I arrive at a more authoritarian truth that wants to impose itself on others, and the others have arrived at a more cooperative truth that wants to bring others together, do we honor the authoritarians or?
Until they go to impose it on you. And then
okay.
I think, and let's be honest, in some places in the world, you have either a theocracy or you have a more autocratic system than we have here. And there are going to be, we don't believe in chaos.
Okay.
There are ways to slowly make changes
Yeah.
and to make changes without revolution, total revolution. In fact, I believe it is the most revolutionary form of revolution is to revolt against old ways of revolution.
Ah.
The Bolsheviks weren't wrong.
Okay.
However, to put down a tyranny
Yeah.
violently, you create another tyranny.
True. Very true.
And it doesn't matter what that truth is or not truth. They were right.
Yeah.
The tyranny of the czars was wrong.
Yeah.
But to put down those folks, they created another tyranny.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So the real most revolutionary way of revolution is to revolt against the old way of might makes right,
Yes. Yes.
and to change people's hearts,
Yes.
to change individuals. Baha'is don't believe, it's nice if someone's interested in the faith and might want to become a Baha'i. That's great. But really, we want to be protagonists with everybody else in the world in those areas in which we can agree. You know, so Baha'is should not be isolated within their community, but should be outward looking and should be living and interacting with the rest of their community. Baha'is, some of the things Baha'is are doing now, we have what are called devotionals. And we're encouraging people in our neighborhoods or friends to get together and share prayers, no matter what your belief is. Because what if our neighborhood becomes more prayerful?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
That might be, that's revolutionary right there, baby.
You have your devotionals around the fire pit.
Oh,
That's-
you could say that.
That's what your fire pit is all about.
Well, we also, pre-COVID, we would have devotionals in our
Yes, yes.
but some people know we sometimes have fire pits, and it's just for people to sit and talk and exchange ideas and get to know one another. And my community is primarily musicians and artists and poets and writers. So a lot of the folks I invite are poets and writers and musicians. And people that I do events with, or that maybe I teach workshops for, or we learn from each other, whatever. So, you know, when I do a fire pit, you know, I don't think I'm going to do a fire pit while the weather is this.
Yeah. Maybe not till October.
Yeah, well, it just depends on the weather, but I enjoy a good fire no matter what the weather is.
Yeah, that's true.
But I don't think many people, hey, I'm going to do a fire pit, and it's 103.
Right.
How do you feel about coming by?
Maybe an ice pit. We could do something like that. Maura?
There, I know that I've only seen it driving by. There's a building in Columbia that's got the word Baha'i on it. Is that called your church?
Yeah, there is a Baha'i Center that's on Assembly. Yeah.
Yes, it is on Assembly, but since COVID, we have not used it for good reason.
Yeah.
And we are encouraged to step out into our communities, step out into our neighborhoods. And that location now doesn't serve what we need to be doing, and also maybe the location isn't well fitted. There's a lot of homeless that camp out on our doorstep.
That's true.
So we are actually in the process of selling that property.
I guess what I was asking is, you know, you said that there's no public prayer or back and forth with that. What would you have been doing in that building? It's not like that every Sunday kind of thing.
So what was the building used for if it's not used for
Well, we
worship
do have
service?
9 holy days a year, okay? And I can recite those holy days if you need to. We also would have, every religion eventually has its own calendar.
Yes.
You have the Christian calendar, you have the Islamic calendar, the Jewish calendar, the Buddhist calendar, the Hindus have a calendar. Baha'is have a calendar of 19 months, of 19 days, and 4 days or 5 days, depending on if it's leap year, days of intercalary, which are days of hospitality and the giving of gifts. So every 19 days, Baha'is meet in what is called a feast. And it isn't a big meal. It is a time when we meet and share prayers. And we then share community business. And then we have the social portion where there might be some refreshments. So we meet those. We meet on the 19 days. And on other, you know, like prior to COVID, they were having a Sunday morning meeting where folks could come to share prayers or hear about the faith or sing music or whatever. But with COVID, we haven't been doing that there. It,
Third Saturday.
yeah, and they used to do third Saturday fireside. They would have a meeting. If anyone wanted to come and learn about the faith, they would maybe have a talk on some topic that relates to Baha'i, such as science and religion or equality of men and women, or maybe hit an event in history or whatever. But presently we aren't using the building. One, it's because of COVID. Two, the needs of the community are different than it is. That doesn't preclude us from in the future, because the building's totally paid for. That doesn't preclude in the future that we might buy something else or build something else at a different location. But right now, it's not filling the needs that our community needs at this time. But the Baha'is aren't really a building.
Not building kind of people
It's more important what we do
in the community.
among our friends
Yeah.
and in our community.
Yeah.
So Baha'is are encouraged to have folks into their home and just discuss spiritual principles. And if someone wants to hear about our faith, that's great too. But it's more important to spiritualize the whole community than 200 corners every Sunday morning. You know, because that's what we have now. I don't know how many churches are on town, but
Right.
you know, it shouldn't just be on this corner and this corner. It should be the whole community should be spiritualized. And how do you do that? You know, Baha'is are trying, and we're reevaluating it all the time, and how we can help our communities become more spiritualized, to become more open, to be less prejudiced towards one another. And that doesn't necessarily mean we need a building.
Oh, yeah. It's true.
Okay, and I'm not, you know, I'm looking at a community that's working real hard to keep this going.
Right.
So I'm not trying
Right.
to
No,
step
it's
on
it's a legitimate thing, you know, of
Yeah.
whether churches need buildings, and actually, you know, many in the Christian church these days are asking the same question, because a lot of people are not coming back. A lot of people are not, you know, even watching you online, you know. So do you need a building? Do you need more of just everybody meeting in homes and going out in their community as, you know, as ambassadors of love into a community? Oh yeah, when Jesus is, when two or more are gathered, you know. So
When two or more are gathered.
so, you know, whenever and wherever we gather, if we're gathering with the intention of love and spirit, then that is where the holy shows up. Absolutely. So it's not about the building, no, but, you know, and everybody's been trying to still do traditional church, and who knows what the future of this is? Who knows?
Well, I learned to sing in church, you know.
Yeah.
Al, I got a question for you, and I think this is
Yeah.
something that certainly fascinated me when I first started to become familiar with Baha'i, is that the Baha'i faith actually brings in change. It's okay. There's change that will happen, instead of most religions that I'm familiar with saying you got to do it the same way every time, and this is the way it should be. But there's something very wonderfully encompassing, maybe because of the community direction. But can you explain that a little bit?
Okay, so the question was basically that some religions sort of calcify their dogmas, their doctrines. Gail, correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but the Baha'is seem to embrace evolution and change. And you said it before, but that it's a progressive faith, that you're progressively evolving. So the Baha'i faith seems to embrace new things a little bit better than perhaps some other religions.
Okay, I'm going to explain it from my perspective.
Okay.
Okay, this isn't an official Baha'i perspective. I want people to understand, again, this is the Baha'i Faith according to Al. This is the Baha'i Faith.
Right.
Okay. First of all, Baha'u'llah, we have the scriptures of Baha'u'llah, and we have the authorized translations or explanations of the writings of Baha'u'llah by his son, Abdul-Baha. And that is in Baha'u'llah's Will and Testament. So we consider those scriptural. We also consider the writings of the Bab scriptural. Where Baha'u'llah has directly spoken on a subject, we will not change that. But there are many details in many areas where he speaks about, people must come together and discuss this and come to that. Those things can be changed. Even in the Baha'i organization, we have no clergy, okay?
No.
But once a year in our local communities, we elect 9 adults who have achieved the age of 21 to serve as a spiritual assembly, which adjure on community business. We have a national spiritual assembly, which is elected each year. And then we have the Universal House of Justice, which is our world governing body. And that body is elected every 5 years. Within the Will and Testament of Baha'u'llah and within his writings and teachings, the Universal House of Justice has the right to legislate on anything that isn't directly spelled out in the scriptures and in the book of laws. Okay? And they may change or abrogate any decision they have made when it no longer fits the circumstances. But again, they cannot alter anything Baha'u'llah says.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah.
So within that concept, not just individually bringing yourself to account, but Baha'is, if one of our governing, whether it's local or national or international, makes a decision, and they realize it no longer fits the circumstances, then they should change it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's
We also, Baha'u'llah was very, very direct that there will be no tradition or dogma in the faith. So there, like a Baha'i wedding ceremony, is all that is required is that before 2 witnesses that have been approved by the local spiritual assembly, you recite this verse together, and that is, we will all verily abide by the will of God. The rest of the marriage ceremony is up to the individuals. Some, that may be all they do. Some may then have musicians and other prayers and whatever.
yeah.
But it's very open. I'm looking for
Oh, she's
Gail.
she's
you know.
moved around.
But I hope that answers the question. There is created within the faith, in the laws of Baha'u'llah, method for change and the adaptation to circumstances as they may change. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to change the laws of Baha'u'llah. We can't.
Yeah.
But in those areas that he didn't specifically speak to, there is room. And that should be that way.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Al, this has been great. We have
you.
been. Well, I know we've gone a little bit over a good hour-long talk, but it's always great. I mean, this is deep. It's deep stuff, and we didn't know, anything about Baha'i as we began, or some of us didn't in the room, and now we have a deeper understanding, and we are appreciative for your time and for you sharing your journey and Baha'i according to Al.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that.
Yes.
Because there's so much more I could have said
Of course.
about the history and about the teachings, but I think you can give too much at one time.
Sure.
I don't think this was meant to be a lecture. I
No.
think this was meant to be a conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I thank you.
I thank you. And again, the Baha'i website, if people are looking for it.
Baha'i.org. BAHAI.org.
All right, cool.
Or you can look me up.
Oh, yep.
And I will gladly sit and talk with you and give you something to read, and to the point where you say, "Guy, I hope that isn't Al on the phone."
How many people in Columbia say that?
A lot, you know. Oh, I hope he doesn't ask me out for coffee. Oh,
Well, Al Black, thank you. We appreciate your time. We appreciate everything.
and I
This evening.
appreciate what Jubilee Circle's doing.
All right. And you can visit our website at jubileecircle.com and learn more about us and join us on in this traditional building for a non-traditional celebration every Sunday morning, or watch us on the YouTube. But thank you so much for joining us for this evening of Jubilee in Conversation, and we will be back again with another one, so stay tuned. Thank you.